Welcome everyone, we are live. For the last talk of the day, we're going to talk about the high price of building a business around Matrix with Benedict and Patrick. As always, you can ask questions in the chat room and I give them the stage.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction. So yes, I'm Patrick. I'm Chief Product Officer at Element and a Managing Director. And with me is Benedict, who is the founder and CEO of Connect2X. And together, we'd like to talk to you about a tricky topic, which is the price of free software, right? That sounds like a contradiction in itself. So that is why it's challenging. So the way I'd like to start is actually to introduce a bit of a typology of open source. So you might or might not agree on this. It's not a scientific thing, it's just my own way of thinking about this. So the first one is non-commercial open source projects. Everybody knows what that is. It could be a hobby thing. It could be something driven by a foundation for the greater good, but not for a profit. It could be sponsored projects. I've put some examples below that you surely all are familiar with. That is one part of open source. There is a second part I have here on the left. I called it peripheral. So these are open source projects that are done, strongly driven by commercial companies and entities, but outside their main revenue stream, their main business model. So like Facebook driving React or Google driving Kubernetes, or in my former life, I used to work for the German company Xing, which was very heavily involved in Ruby on Rails and open source, but actually it was a professional social network competing with LinkedIn, nothing to do with Ruby on Rails. So heavy open source outside the main revenue stream. Again, the question of what is commercial about open source it's not even asked. But then there's this third category, I've put that here in the middle, that is commercial open source software. So there are companies that drive the projects to a large extent, not just by themselves. There's typically also a large community, and we see that also in Matrix. I also see that in other companies like WordPress or Nextcloud or LiveKit. In these cases, there are serious commercial companies behind this who work together in a collaborative mode with the community, but the actual project is also a main revenue stream. The talk will focus on the middle part, not on the left and on the right. And that's going to be important. Now, if something is commercial, that means someone is earning some money. And how does that even work? So I figured I put this extra slide in here, as most of the folks here might be engineers and not business folks. Excuse me if I bore you, but let me quickly go into like, how does a business even work? So what is happening? Like any normal business, like any mom and pop shop, any car manufacturer works like this. So there is someone creating some value. You have here value created. So overall, there's a lot of value created. And typically you have some cost. You employ some people. If you're in engineering, you might put some materials into this, manufacturing or whatever. You have some cost. And then there's a buyer who's willing to pay something, and you agree on a price. And depending on where that price is, the buyer gets some value, hopefully, otherwise the buyer wouldn't buy. But also I call it here the maintainer, but the producer, whatever, the company that is creating the value also keeps some value. Because otherwise, what's the motivation even to do that? That's how every single business on this planet typically works. So what is different in open source? Super interesting. And that is actually following a line of thinking that is coming from a product guy from Red Hat, where the perspective is actually open source is an extension of the supply chain. So what does that mean? You still have this value creation idea, but in addition to like some company, some maintainer, some manufacturer, you have the community, external contributors who supply into the overall created value. So some external parties essentially. And that means the overall value is getting bigger because everybody is contributing together. And that's super appealing. That's one of the superpowers of open source, that you have that effect. And typically the community also has some cost and also captures some value for itself. And that can have various forms. It doesn't have to be monetary. It could also be recognition, appreciation, learning. So I'm not an engineer, but I'm a contributor on Home Assistant. I do that in my spare time, and out of it I get that I learned Python. And I get recognition. I'm proud of that, and my son is actually proud of that as well. So I also capture some value out of that, even if it's not monetary. So that's pretty cool. So that makes open source pretty interesting and appealing. Now, there can be a situation where this actually turns into a challenge. And the challenge is, if you have the middle part here brought into a sandwich situation. And that can happen if the value provided by others, the value take here is too large, or the value take from the potential buyers is too large. So that means, for example, the buyer assuming, hey, well, this is open source. Like, why would I even pay anything for this to anyone? I should get everything for free. I'm entitled to this. That's what the license says. End of story. So then it turns into an excuse for a very large value capture. And that might squeeze out whoever tries to make a living in the middle of it. So the maintainer might actually get into a sandwich position. And it's that sandwich position that we'd like to think a little bit deeper about in this talk. Some of you might have been in the talk earlier today by Matthias Stürmer, Professor Stürmer from Switzerland, who introduces a Swiss open source study from last year. He also had printouts, so someone was lucky to grab the printout. I failed, but I have a screenshot from a very interesting page. Top reasons to use open source software. And there are good reasons. Number 4 is, I don't need to pay. This is free. This is my top reason. And that shows, it highlights a little bit that very high up in the rationale of engaging is actually this idea of, I avoid any payment. I get something cheaper. And that is actually where this moment of sandwich situation starts to exist. And at that point, Benedict will explain you why that is a challenge.
Yeah, cost-free doesn't really mean it's cost-free. It's mostly not visible that there was work done in the open source project, and it's hidden underwater. So like the machine room on the Titanic, it wasn't visible to the people on the top of the ship. And they didn't even know maybe that there were hundreds of people working for them to put coal in the machines to make it run. So let's look how this is in the matrix ecosystem. So what is hidden and what is visible to the end user. And with end user, I also mean the persons who decide how to spend money. So on the management position in a company, for example. And the servers in the matrix ecosystem are not visible. They are just there for the end user. They just work. Many users didn't even know that a messenger needs a server running in a cloud or something like that. And this applies to many components in the matrix ecosystem. For example, bridges. At the end, as an end user, you only see, okay, there are messages, but you don't know that there is a service that is running and connecting to you to another messaging system or something like that. Also SDKs, they are running deep down in your client, and as a user you don't see them. You may interact with them. That's why I put the palm on it, because there are also SDKs that handle a bit of the user interaction. So if you press a button, something runs in the background and you see another page. So you may feel it as a user, but you don't know that it's there. And so you may think, okay, clients, the user sees the client, the UI, but he must, at the end, he doesn't know, maybe it's open source, or is it really from the company that I'm buying it from? So now the question is, who is building the component and why is it not visible? So we have the core for all these open source projects. So maintenance, fixing security issues. You have compliance. You need to think about the architecture or features that are changing the architecture. You have to done research and development, and at the end, you also need to manage the community and all that stuff. It's hidden from the end user, from the open source software that is hidden in your messenger. And what you can see is, if you open you open the repository, you may see, okay, there are merge requests, there are bug reports, some users make translations in the community. This may be the visible part, but at the end, there's a lot of work done that is not visible to the users that are using the open source components. So let's look who relies on Matrix. And this is a really large mind map that Patrick has created, and it's not even covering up all companies and all markets in the Matrix ecosystem. And you see there's government, healthcare, education, but the most important part, and this is the sandwich position that Patrick talked about, is the core. So there are core components in the Matrix ecosystem that everyone uses. That mostly are the SDKs, the home servers, and there are companies that are running on it. And most of these companies are open source companies and struggle with the problem being in that sandwich position. So let's go to an example, the TI Messenger. We as Connect2X are in 84% of all TI usable by 84% of all publicly insured people in Germany. I didn't know how I started the sentence. We are usable by 84% of the people. So, but we are only paid for 40.3%. So there is a large part of the that is just using Trixity and doesn't give anything back. And on the sign-up side, it isn't any better. Only a few companies are just giving something back to signups, to the open source project signups. Yeah, now that's your part.
Yeah,
again.
It's really interesting if you have that in mind. And going back to this open source study from Professor Stürmer, he also asked in the study, so why would you not use open source? And the number one answer is, we are insecure about the future of these components. They might not have a clear business model. So that keeps me from using it. So there's a bit of an irony in this. I don't want to pay. I love it that it's free, but then I don't use it because the future is unclear. So basically, it re-emphasizes this tension in the system that we should all be aware of. And overall, if that is like coming out in a study like this in Switzerland as a number one reason of not using open source software, it actually does the whole open source idea a disservice. And that's why I find this important. Actually, it even increased from 3 years ago, like 21, where you did the study in the past, to 24. That thing even went up. So the trend is also not really helpful. And that is why our call to action here from Benedict and myself is, well, shouldn't everybody think about how to navigate that iceberg? You wanna go on that awareness thing a little bit?
Sorry, I gave the talk too early to you. Yeah, there are things we can do as an open source company, and here again, many things we can do are hidden from the outside, from the public. So it's like dual licensing. The community usually don't have a problem with it because it's still free, it's still usable as long as you keep your own software open source. But on the company side, you need a commercial license, and that's where we as a company can profit because they need to pay us a license fee, for example. But we can also give them subscription models so they can pay for security or maintenance or other support mechanisms. And the thing that we can publicly do is raise awareness. So there is an alliance. It's the Open Source Business Alliance that is doing exactly that. So if you're an open source company, you can be part of the Open Source Business Alliance. And they are doing a lot of stuff. For example, for public tenders, they are writing document. They are helping the public, the government side, if they are making tenders to pay attention to open source software. So the principle public money, public code. So at the end, if you are an open source software user, be a good citizen. So support the makers and question the takers. Not every taker must be bad or something like that, but raise the question for yourself. Can I give something back? And can I support the makers? Yeah, and there are some actions that we recommend. So as a community member, you can test, you can review, you can document, you can translate, you can report issues, at best clearly, but you can also support newcomers. So there are a lot of actions that you can take that don't take much time from you, but it helps the whole ecosystem, the whole matrix ecosystem. And as a business, you can plan budget at the beginning of a project for maintenance of open source projects. You can also upstream your changes. If you are fixing bugs, don't fork the project, just upstream the fixes. And respect licenses and boundaries, and maybe also measure the contribution. So if your developers contribute back, this could be a good number that you can put on slides and make everyone happy. Okay, we have a rising number in the project. Yeah. And on the government side, fund the commons you rely on, and try to use open source standards, so public money, public code. And yeah, that's from me what I want to give you at the last talk of this day. Let's keep Matrix open and alive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick and Benedict, for this really nice talk. Does anyone have a question? Oh, here.
So as people, you run companies which do this commercial open source projects for a couple of years now. Would you do it again? And if you would do it again in the same way, or would you change things from the beginning?
That's hard to say. Open source is our DNA, so it's hard to change our DNA and say we wouldn't do it the same. Maybe we wouldn't be too open, so having for some parts of our software a more restricted license, but I don't think we would change this DNA to be an open source company.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working for Element, and the founders of Element, like Matthew and Ahmadine, I mean, they invented the whole thing, right? If they hadn't had this open source spirit from the start, I mean, nobody would be here. None of you. Like all the stuff you do as a business or as a hobby or as whatever or as a government, you wouldn't be doing it, right? So, like, would I recommend to Matthew? Well, what a stupid idea to open source all that stuff. No, of course not, right? But at the same time, of course, I think it is important to have a transparent discussion about the tension in the system. And that is important. And I had this really interesting conversation the other day with someone working for an environmental agency, actually also using Matrix. And in the discussion, we discovered it's a little bit like with nature. Like everybody appreciates nature. Would you close down nature? No, of course not. But if everybody just exploits the nature, that doesn't work. The planet will die. So that is something that by now fairly few people challenge. Well, depends on the region of where you live on the planet. But generally, that's accepted, right? You got to care for your nature. So you got to care for your ecosystem here as well, and for your technology, and for Matrix. And I think that is super important.
Any more questions?
And actually, before that question, I mean, just going back, everybody knows that campaign about public money, public code. And I don't know if someone spotted that I took the liberty here on that slide to change it a little bit. There's also public maintenance, right? Because in many places, people have that idea, well, I spent money, I get something, I bought it, it's all done now. Well, it's not. Especially with software. I mean, the moment you stop working on it, I guess everybody here who's a developer here? Oh, okay. So you guys probably understand that the moment you stop working on something, well, it decays. It's no longer secure the next day. I mean, you got to keep it up, right? There is maintenance that needs to happen. Otherwise, what are you doing? So I think public money, public code is cool, but it falls short of public maintenance. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you. Do you think all of this is applicable to B2C businesses? I mean, because we all love open source here, I think, but maybe a lot of end users maybe don't know what is open source and all the costs that you explained that are implied. Isn't there a kind of glass ceiling for those kind of businesses that would want to build on Matrix for those kind of end users?
Well, I mean, if you build a consumer business, and I've done that the past 10 years of my life with Xing, where we had like 20 million users on the system and 1 million paying. I mean, that was a constant debate on how do you actually set it up in a way that some people see enough value to pay for it. And Xing being Xing by the time always had this like, no, we don't want to do this American way of making the user the product and doing micro-targeting and exploiting all the data and all that. Because that is where you end up when you try to do everything for free, because it's not free. It is not free, right? So in a consumer world, you've got to find your business model. And if you have a sustainable business model that does the right thing, you should be able to finance on the back of it the tools you're using. Because otherwise, these tools will disappear, and then what do you do then, right? So I don't think there's any contradiction with the consumer world, but yeah, in a world of surveillance capitalism, you got to ask yourself, what is my business model on the consumer side, right?
Thanks. Can you give an example on the upstream your changes from your context perspective? As in some example what you done on upstreaming your changes, basically.
I'm not sure I understood the question.
Just on
upstream your changes.
Yeah. So can you give some examples there? What have you done in that space here?
I can do that. Upstream your changes. What we mean with that is if you, as a company, you don't have to be an open source company for that. If you find bugs and you fix them, you should make them put them up to the main repository, for example. So technically, you would make open a merge request instead of forking it and maintain your own version of the open source project that contains maybe this fix. So everyone has this change, and not only you as a company.
Yeah, so we see that at Element quite a bit because we have forked quite a lot. And there's a very good, positive community out there of folks, like organizations, institutional folks who contribute back. So that's really nice, actually. So you have corporations and governments contributing code back. That's cool. That's really cool. You also see the opposite, where we see in the wild like interesting feature additions to like an Element client. And you wonder, like, why didn't they just contribute it back? I mean, that is something that might be meaningful for other people as well. Without shaming anyone, there's a case where a lot of taxpayer money was spent on accessibility, while at the same time another government institution was paying Element a lot for accessibility. So we worked on that and delivered it for everybody, public money, public code, etc. While that other organization was keeping it all to themselves. I mean, that's a waste of taxpayer money. That's the opposite of what we're trying to do in a collaborative ecosystem when we do open source. And that happens. And that happens quite a few times. And that is not helpful. So please, I mean, if you are working on your software and do your cool stuff, I mean, share back. Why not? You're benefiting. Let everybody benefit. That's why we're here, right? Who's contributing back here in the room? I got to ask that question. Who has done a pull request? Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
There's another question.
Yeah, and I think it's related to the previous question. I was wondering about on the right side on one of the sheets you said community costs and community benefits. So what is the meaning? And then you had the maintainer costs are going down or the maintainer benefits. So what is the interpretation of the community costs in that slide?
Yeah, so you have participants of the community that was in the beginning with the sandwich situation.
On the right side.
Yeah.
Community profit.
Yeah, community. So you could have a case, maybe the next slide where it's even clearer. Yeah, so here you have a large community. Profit. I like to separate the world a little bit into makers and takers. And there are folks out there that are just purely takers, that act as a community participant but are not, because they're not giving back, they take. So what starts happening is they take something, they put a nice margin on this, so they make a nice business model without having the cost because they didn't create it. And then they go into competition with the actual makers. That initiates, for the economists among you, a race to the bottom on pricing. And that will then squeeze the margin that is left for the actual makers. So the actual maker doesn't have any money anymore to make anything or maintain anything or do the whole iceberg work, like do the machine room of the Titanic. That machine room will stop at some point. But for like a short moment, a taker can benefit actually quite nicely and make a good business. And there are cases where like this is really extraordinary, because you find takers that actually have no clue about Matrix. They just realize there is money to be made. So they do a project, and if you have on the other side a client, like a government agency that unfortunately is also not entirely clear about what it's doing, they commission a project to someone who doesn't have a clue, and the result is maybe not really that good, or maybe even a security risk. You can read about that if you go back in the Heise CT magazine a few months back. It's a nice article about that on the example of Matrix. You can Google that. called Trittbrettfahrer in German. What happens is that in the end you might think, open source is crap. It doesn't work. It's not secure. It's not what we expected. It's really unfortunate that we picked this. But yeah, I mean, this is predictable. You were buying it from someone who doesn't have a clue and who just took it and made some money with you. So that is really important. That was actually one driver behind the study that Benedict has shown from the Open Source Business Alliance, where they said, we got to educate the procurement of this planet. What do you even need to look out for when you buy open source software? Because it is not obvious to a government office of what it actually means and who's on the taking side and who's on the making side and who's really knowing what they talk about and who's maybe not necessarily knowing that. So I really encourage everybody, if that was too quick before, scan this QR code from the Open Source Business Alliance. It's in English, don't be scared. And it gives you some very, very good pointers at how to properly procure open source software.
Yeah, so I have another question, or maybe could you go back to the last slide, the one, be a good citizen? No, the very last one. Yeah, this one. I think there's two things missing there, actually, because for business, there's no mention of donations. It might be included in budget for maintenance or something, but I think donations are a big part. And I think businesses, all the business who are just using open source, I mean, many of them can't contribute back code because they might be too small. They have no developers, so they can't give you back any code, but they might be able to give you a couple of bucks. You know, it might not be much, couple hundred, couple of thousand, but it should be in there, and business should really think about this and make it a habit to, like, I don't know, once a year scan your dependencies in your company where you make money from, and then just see where you can give back and how much money you can give back, even if it's just, I don't know, $100 or whatever. And then the other thing,
or become a member of the Matrix.
Yeah, for Matrix it's easy because you got the foundation membership, etc. But smaller projects might not have that set up, so you know it's an individual thing. And for community, the other part of that, if you include maintainers in the community column, make it easy to do that. So be open to donations, like, I don't know, create a legal entity, a Verein or a company or whatever it might be, so that you can accept these donations, because especially for a lot of small projects, it's just hard to do it as a company, accounting wise, because you can't just give out money to a single individual person without receiving a receipt or a donation receipt or whatever. So for the maintainers, make it easy to do that, and for the business, just do that, I guess.
Super cool. Yeah.
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add. Yeah.
Is there any more questions?
Do you have any further suggestions how to interact with bad actors that are littering the ecosystem and build a copper mine or something like that? You said educating the tender writers, but have you any further suggestions how to interact with those bad actors?
Yeah, it's hard because you can't blame one for doing it. Yeah, it's open source, so they can use it. So doing the blame game, we wanted to prevent that on our slides. It's hard because we are also a company who wants to make money, and they are a company who wants to make money. So it's really hard to stand here and say we want to blame these companies. What you can do, and that's the awareness thing, to go to these companies, make them aware that they are using open source software, and making them aware that you, as an open source company, may need money to keep that level high of quality in your open source project, so they benefit from it. And yeah, I think that's really important. Talk to them and don't try to blame them. Yeah.
I mean, maybe to add to that, there are probably two types. There's a type that is consciously doing that, and I think I'm fully aligned with Benedict here. That's what you should do. But there's a second type that is not really aware of what they're doing. They don't know this. They don't know about this complexity. They think, oh yeah, it's a bunch of hackers, having a pizza, writing a Synapse server, whatever. It's like a hobby thing. So, which is why in the beginning, on the very first slide, I had this, and I think this is a bit of a confusion in the open source community. And I tried to find some literature about it, but I couldn't. So hey, maybe I invented something here, but I think that is confusing folks because there are a lot of non-commercial projects, and talking about money here doesn't even make any sense. So if that is your mindset, it doesn't even occur to you that there might be like this sandwich situation somewhere. Or if you are on that side, why would I pay for using React or who even, or like it's kind of like outside the thinking, right? So it's important, like on the awareness side, to be really clear that in the matrix environment, well, you also have like the left and the right, but you also have the middle, and depending on what you're using, what you're doing, a conversation might bring that awareness, and that might change the perspective and initiate a bit of a paradigm shift here.
Good. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much for this debate. It was really nice.